A chilling mist rolled low between the trunks of the towering redwoods, weaving ghost-like tendrils through roots as old as time. The air was cool and heavy, thick with the scent of damp soil and pine. Amelia tightened her jacket and adjusted the straps of her backpack while Grant checked the GPS, though both knew that in this part of the forest, technology was more suggestion than guide. They were miles from any marked trail, following whispers of an old story that had refused to fade, the tale of 4 college students who vanished in the redwoods 4 years ago. No trace was ever found, just scattered belongings and a few blurry photographs. To some, it was a tragic accident, to others, a mystery that the forest itself didn't want solved. As the 2 hikers pressed deeper, the world around them seemed to close in. The rustle of small animals disappeared, replaced by the rhythmic creak of ancient branches shifting in the wind. Even their footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of moss and decaying leaves. Grant broke the silence first, his voice low. "Feels like the forest is listening." Amelia didn't answer right away. She had that same uneasy feeling, like unseen eyes were watching from between the trunks. The redwoods weren't just trees, they were pillars of history, older than memory, and their sheer size gave them an almost sentient presence. A crow called once, harsh and distant, before silence reclaimed the woods. The fog thickened, blurring their path until it was hard to tell which way they had come. Grant stopped suddenly and knelt beside a tree whose bark looked oddly discolored. Long, jagged marks ran down its surface, claw-like slashes that cut deep into the trunk. He brushed a finger along one groove. The wood beneath wasn't dry and solid as it should have been, but soft, spongy, almost wet. A faint, sour odor rose up, making his nose wrinkle. "Animal," he muttered. Amelia shook her head slowly. "No animal leaves marks like that." The trees grew denser, their shadows stretching across the path like black veins. Sunlight barely reached the forest floor now. Every so often, Amelia glanced behind them, convinced she saw movement at the edge of the fog, something that stayed just out of focus. Her flashlight flickered briefly, even though the batteries were new. When they paused for water, she realized how unnaturally quiet it had become. No wind, no birds, not even the sound of distant water. Just the steady sound of their own breathing. A few hundred meters ahead, they found a small clearing littered with fragments of torn fabric and rusted metal. An old canteen. The corner of a nylon tent. Grant crouched and turned over a piece of plastic half buried in the soil, a camera lens, cracked but recognizable. Nearby, a broken compass gleamed faintly under the weak light. Amelia's heart sank. These things didn't belong to recent hikers, they were relics of the missing group. She knelt beside a log, brushing away the moss and dirt until she uncovered the faint imprint of a boot, too weathered to tell whose, but fresh enough to make her uneasy. "Maybe we should turn back," she whispered, but her voice trembled as if she didn't fully believe her own words. Grant, stubborn as ever, pointed deeper into the trees. "Just a little farther. We're close to where they camped, I can feel it." The mist swirled, and for a moment Amelia thought she saw a shadow dart between 2 trees. Human-sized, but wrong in the way it moved, like a puppet without strings. She blinked, and it was gone. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed Grant's arm. "Did you see that?" He turned, scanning the fog, his face pale. "See what?" But Amelia didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the tree just beyond them. The claw-marked trunk they had passed. Earlier now seemed to glisten faintly, as though the bark was moist with something dark. When the light hit it, the surface seemed to twitch, slow, deliberate, almost like breathing. The forest held its breath with them, every sound swallowed by the ancient redwoods. Whatever was in these woods, Amelia thought, it hadn't forgotten the ones who came before. And as the mist closed around them, she began to wonder if they would ever leave this place at all. The mist deepened as Amelia and Grant pushed forward, each step sinking into a carpet of damp moss that muffled their movements. The air grew colder, almost metallic, and with it came a faint hum, so low it was more a vibration than a sound. Amelia couldn't tell if it came from the earth or from somewhere deep within the forest. She kept glancing back, her flashlight sweeping through the fog, half expecting to see something following. Nothing moved, yet the oppressive stillness made her chest tighten. After what felt like hours of trudging through uneven terrain, they stumbled upon a clearing that seemed frozen in time. Half buried beneath layers of leaves and rot was a decaying campsite. Torn tents clung to the earth like deflated lungs, their nylon shredded and stained with black spots. A rusted lantern lay sideways beside the remains of a campfire, now just a ring of cold stones and soggy ash. Amelia crouched, running her hand over a piece of fabric, a faded college logo barely visible beneath the dirt. Her stomach twisted. "It's them," she murmured. Grant said nothing, his eyes scanning the perimeter, uneasy. The air was heavy with the scent of mold and something else, sharp, like copper. Flies buzzed faintly near the remains of an old backpack, their wings catching the dim light. Grant knelt beside a fallen log, brushing away debris. His fingers hit something hard. He dug carefully and uncovered a half-buried camera. Its casing was cracked, the lens shattered, but the memory card slot was still intact. He turned it over in his hands like an artifact. "This could be from the missing group," he said quietly. Amelia nodded, her voice barely audible. "Let's take it back and check." As she stood, her flashlight beam caught the trunk of a nearby tree, the same kind of clawed, blackened markings they'd seen before, only here they were deeper, more violent. The bark looked diseased, soft and uneven, with strange white veins creeping outward like spiderwebs. When Amelia leaned closer, she realized the wood wasn't just discolored, it was moving. Tiny ripples spread through it, as if something beneath the bark was shifting slowly, rhythmically. She took a step back, heart hammering. "Grant, look at this." He approached and aimed his light. The surface pulsed again, subtle but unmistakable. "It's alive," he whispered, the words tasting foreign in the still air. The longer they looked, the more wrong it felt, as if the tree itself was breathing, inhaling through invisible pores. A faint moisture glistened on its surface, dripping slowly to the forest floor in red-tinted droplets. The metallic scent thickened, making Amelia gag. She stumbled backward, clutching her scarf over her nose. Grant reached out, steadying her, but his curiosity drew him closer again. He brushed a gloved finger across the bark. It was warm, far warmer than it should have been. He pulled his hand back sharply when the surface flexed beneath his touch, leaving behind a faint, sticky residue that clung to his glove like mucus. "Let's go," Amelia said, her voice shaking now. "We shouldn't be here." But Grant didn't move immediately. He stared at the tree, transfixed, the fog swirling around him. For just a second, he thought he saw something in the pattern of the bark, the faint impression of an eye. Half-formed, watching. He blinked and it was gone, but the feeling of being observed only grew stronger. As they left the clearing, the air behind them seemed to close in, the mist swallowing the campsite until it vanished from view. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken dread. After a few minutes, Amelia looked over her shoulder one last time. Through the veil of fog, she thought she saw a faint glow from where the tree had stood, red and pulsing, like the slow beat of a heart hidden deep in the woods. The forest opened suddenly into a clearing that felt wrong, as though it didn't belong to the same world they had been walking through. The mist thinned slightly, revealing a circle of ancient redwoods standing like sentinels. Their trunks were colossal, some wide enough to swallow a cabin whole. In the center stood one tree larger than all the rest, so vast and towering that it disappeared into the fog above. Even from a distance, Amelia and Grant could sense something different about it. The air around it shimmered faintly, and the scent of decay hung thick. Amelia slowed her pace as they approached, each footstep echoing strangely despite the soft ground. The bark of the massive redwood was streaked with dark, unnatural veins that crawled upward like lightning bolts frozen in time. At first glance, they looked like dried sap trails, but when Grant shone his flashlight closer, the streaks reflected light with a faint, greasy sheen. A network of fungus, pale white and deep crimson, spread along the trunk in tangled, web-like formations. The fungi seemed to grow in patterns, almost deliberate, curling into spirals and shapes that resembled letters or symbols neither of them recognized. The smell was overwhelming now, damp, sour, and faintly metallic. Amelia pressed her sleeve against her nose, eyes watering. "This isn't normal rot," she whispered. "It's something else." Grant didn't reply. He stepped closer to the massive tree, drawn to it as if it called out silently. When his boot brushed against a thick root, a sticky sound came from beneath. The root was coated with a film of red fluid that glistened like blood. He crouched and touched it carefully with the tip of a stick. The fluid hissed faintly, eating into the wood until it darkened. Grant's face drained of color. This is some kind of acid." Amelia shook her head, staring at the fungus-covered trunk. "It's feeding on something." Maybe the tree isn't dying, maybe it's consuming. Her voice quivered, the idea too grotesque to finish. Then, as she stepped around the base of the redwood, she froze. Embedded in the bark were shapes, faint at first, but unmistakable the longer she looked. Faces. Human faces. Dozens of them, their features distorted as if pressed from beneath the surface. Mouths frozen open in silent screams, eyes stretched wide in terror. Some were barely visible, their outlines blurred by the fungal growth that crept over them like skin. Others looked disturbingly fresh, their details clear enough to make her stomach twist. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. "Grant, look." He turned the flashlight toward where she pointed, and the beam illuminated the grotesque tableau. His breath caught in his throat. The tree wasn't just infested, it was absorbing. The faces seemed almost alive under the shifting light, their mouths twitching, their eyes glistening faintly as if moist. Then, impossibly, one of the mouths moved. A wet, gurgling sound rose from the bark, faint, like air escaping a submerged body. Grant stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the ground, the beam jerking wildly over the fungal veins, casting moving shadows that seemed to slither. The gurgling grew louder, followed by a low creak, the sound of something deep inside the tree shifting. "Let's go," Amelia hissed, her voice trembling. "Grant, now." He nodded, but for a brief moment he couldn't look away. Something about the tree felt magnetic, hypnotic, as though it was aware of them. The pulsing fungus brightened for an instant, glowing faintly red before dimming again, in a rhythm that felt disturbingly like a heartbeat. The forest around them was utterly still, yet heavy with a presence that seemed to press against their skin. As they backed away, the ground beneath them gave a faint tremor, a subtle vibration that seemed to travel through the roots. A few clumps of fungus on the tree's surface detached and fell to the soil with soft, wet thuds. Amelia's flashlight caught one as it landed. It twitched once before lying still, a thin wisp of steam rising from where it touched the earth. Neither of them spoke as they left the clearing. They didn't have to. The terror between them was palpable, a shared understanding that they had seen something that defied reason. The deeper they went into the forest, the quieter it became, until even their footsteps seemed distant. And though they didn't look back, both could feel it, that tree in the clearing, still pulsing, still alive, its unseen eyes following them into the fog. They didn't speak for nearly half an hour as they moved away from the monstrous redwood, the forest pressing closer with every step. The fog grew denser again, muffling sound and blurring the world into a tunnel of gray. Amelia's breathing was ragged, and Grant could still feel the tremor in the ground beneath his boots as though the earth itself pulsed with that same unholy rhythm. When they finally stopped to rest, they found themselves near a small hollow surrounded by ferns and fallen logs slick with moisture. Grant dropped his pack, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled for the camera they'd recovered earlier. "We need to see what's on this," he said quietly. Amelia hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward the fog. "Here, now." He nodded, already pulling out a portable reader from his bag. The screen flickered weakly as he powered it on, the old battery struggling to hold charge. Static filled the first few seconds of the recording before it steadied. The image that appeared sent a chill down both their spines. A group of young people, 4 in total, sitting around a campfire, laughing. Their faces were tired but happy, oblivious to what awaited them. The camera jostled as one of them stood to adjust the fire. A woman's voice, calm but uncertain, said, "We shouldn't have come this far." Another voice replied, jokingly, "Relax, it's just trees." The next few clips were fragmented, time-stamped over several days. The laughter faded, replaced by tense whispers. One clip showed a boy shaking the camera, saying, "We keep hearing it at night, that hum." Another showed the same girl from before, pointing toward a strange symbol carved into a tree, a spiral shape that looked eerily similar to the fungus patterns Amelia and Grant had seen. Her voice trembled. "It's spreading. Every day, there's more of it." Then came the final clip. The camera was jerking wildly, flashes of light cutting through darkness, screams echoing through the trees. The screen tilted to the ground as someone ran, breath ragged. For a split second, the lens caught something enormous in the darkness, a mass of red and white growth clinging to a tree, twitching. A girl's voice shrieked, "It's moving." Before the image cut to black. Grant and Amelia sat frozen, the faint buzz of the reader the only sound. The forest around them felt suddenly too quiet, as though listening to their discovery. Amelia's hands shook as she shut off the device. They didn't just disappear, she whispered. Something took them. A cold wind passed through the hollow, carrying with it a faint, wet smell, the same scent that had lingered near the redwood. The firelight in the video had looked warm and safe, but here the air was thick and heavy, and every shadow seemed alive. Grant stood, sweeping his flashlight in a slow circle. We need to go back to the road. We'll tell the rangers, show them this. But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. They began to pack up their things when Amelia froze mid-motion. Do you hear that? She whispered. Grant stopped, listening. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a rhythmic clicking, like two stones tapping together somewhere deep in the woods. It was getting closer. He switched off the light instinctively. The world plunged into gray-black. The clicking stopped. Then, a faint rustling, as though something moved just beyond the fog. Amelia's pulse raced. She gripped Grant's arm, her fingers digging in. We're not alone. Suddenly, the reader on the ground lit up again, though neither had touched it. The screen glowed with static, then slowly began to show an image, the same clearing they had just left. The redwood. Only now, the fungus glowed brighter, pulsing red in time with a slow, steady rhythm. And then, on the edge of the frame, two figures appeared, blurred, but unmistakable. One male, one female. Both standing very still. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. That's us. Grant snatched the reader and slammed it shut, shoving it into his bag. We're leaving. Now. They stumbled away from the hollow, tripping over roots, moving faster than their eyes could adjust to the dark. Behind them, somewhere in the distance, the clicking started again, steady, patient, following. Neither looked back, but both knew what they'd seen in that video wasn't possible. The forest had recorded them before they ever found the camera. And something in the dark wanted them to finish the same story the missing hikers had begun. Night descended like a shroud, thick and suffocating, swallowing every trace of light beneath the towering canopy of redwoods. The temperature dropped sharply, and the damp air carried a heaviness that clung to their skin. Amelia and Grant found a small patch of relatively dry ground near a fallen log and decided to stop for the night. The weight of what they had seen, the video, the tree, the faces, pressed on them like an invisible hand. Neither wanted to be still, but exhaustion forced them to. Grant managed to get a small fire going after several failed attempts, his hands shaking as he coaxed the flame to life. The orange glow flickered weakly, barely pushing back the darkness. It gave a small comfort, a fragile boundary between them and the endless black beyond. Amelia sat close to the fire, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the tiny flames as if they were the only real thing left in the world. It's too quiet, she murmured. Her voice barely rose above the crackle of burning twigs. Not even crickets. Grant poked at the fire, eyes scanning the trees. The mist had returned, swirling lazily around the trunks, distorting their shapes. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond the firelight, darting out of sight whenever he turned to look. Maybe we scared them off, he said, forcing a chuckle that sounded hollow. Amelia didn't answer. Her gaze had fixed on something in the dark, a faint shimmer, like moisture catching the light. For a second, she thought it was just fog reflecting the fire. Then it moved. Grant, she whispered, voice trembling. There's something out there. He grabbed his flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam barely cut through the fog. All he saw were gnarled trunks and twisting roots. Then, at the very edge of the light, something shifted. A branch. No. It was too fluid, too deliberate. Whatever it was melted back into the mist before he could focus on it. Amelia's breath came fast and shallow. It's watching us, she said. I can feel it. The air seemed thicker now, pressing down on them. The fire sputtered, its flame shrinking as if smothered by invisible hands. Grant threw on more twigs, but the flames refused to rise. Instead, the smoke began to curl in strange patterns, spiraling upward in deliberate motions, forming shapes that almost looked like faces. For a moment, one looked just like the girl from the video, her mouth open in a silent scream. Grant stumbled backward, kicking the fire pit and scattering embers. No, he muttered, his voice cracking. That's not real. It's the smoke, that's all. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. The forest around them seemed alive, shifting, breathing. The faint hum they'd heard earlier returned, low and resonant, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. Amelia turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in her grip. Her beam swept over the nearest tree, and froze. The same fungus they had seen earlier had spread across the bark like veins. White and red strands pulsed faintly, winding up the trunk toward the canopy. What made her blood run cold was that it hadn't been there before. The infection was moving, growing, even as they watched. Grant stepped closer, against every instinct. "It's spreading fast," he whispered. The bark beneath the fungus bulged and flexed, releasing a faint hiss. Then, without warning, a droplet of red fluid oozed from the bark, falling to the ground with a soft splat. It began to smoke where it landed. Amelia yanked Grant's arm. "Don't touch it." The ground beneath them gave a faint vibration, a slow pulse, steady and deep, like a heartbeat buried under the soil. The humming grew louder, resonating through the air until it seemed to come from all directions. The fog began to shift in waves, forming shapes that seemed almost human. Dark silhouettes, countless of them, standing just beyond the reach of light. Amelia's heart pounded. "Grant." He turned, and for the first time she saw genuine terror in his eyes. "We need to go." They grabbed their packs, barely bothering to zip them. The flashlight beam wavered as they stumbled through the trees, but the fog seemed to move with them, curling around their legs like living mist. Behind them, the fire hissed and went out completely. For one fleeting moment before the darkness swallowed it, Amelia thought she saw something emerging from the nearest trunk. A shape, human-sized, covered in fungus, stepping silently from the wood. They ran until their lungs burned, but the forest gave no sense of direction. Every tree looked the same, every path twisted into another. The hum followed them, deep and steady, as if something vast beneath the ground was slowly waking. And when Amelia dared to glance back, just once, she saw the glow, faint and red, pulsing through the mist, keeping pace with them like the steady beat of a heart that refused to die. The forest swallowed them whole. Amelia and Grant stumbled through the dark, tripping over roots, their lungs burning with every ragged breath. The mist was thicker than ever, wrapping around them like wet cloth, cutting off all sense of direction. The beam from Grant's flashlight flickered erratically, casting wild shadows that seemed to move on their own. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to shift, as though the trees were closing in behind them, sealing every path they left. Eventually, they stopped, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't go any farther. The ground ahead dipped into a small ravine, the soil soft and glistening with moisture. Amelia dropped to her knees, gasping for air. "We're lost," she whispered. Her voice trembled with exhaustion and fear. Grant looked around, squinting into the fog. "No," he said, though it sounded more like a plea than certainty. "We just need to go downhill. Streams lead out of forests, right?" But even as he said it, he could feel that this place didn't obey normal rules. The hum was back, faint at first, like a faraway engine, then growing stronger, resonating through the ground beneath them. The soil seemed to vibrate softly, pulsing in sync with that same rhythm they'd heard before. Amelia pressed her palm against the earth and recoiled instantly. It was warm, too warm. Grant's light swept across the ravine, revealing something strange. The slope was covered in pale growths, clustered thickly around the base of several trees. They looked like mushrooms at first glance, white-capped and glistening, but their stems seemed to pulse, slowly expanding and contracting as though breathing. Some were white, others deep red, and several oozed a clear fluid that steamed as it hit the cool air. The stench that drifted up was unbearable, a mix of rotten iron, sharp enough to make them gag. "God," Amelia whispered, clutching her scarf to her face. "It's everywhere." Grant crouched low, shining his light closer. That's when he saw something half buried beneath one of the growths. At first, he thought it was a root. But then he noticed fabric. A sleeve. He reached out, his gloved hand trembling, and brushed away the fungus. Beneath it lay a human arm, pale, mottled with decay, but unmistakably human. The skin seemed fused with the fungal matter, tendrils burrowing into the flesh like veins. Amelia screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over a root. Grant froze, unable to move, staring at the body. It wasn't just one. All around the ravine, the fungi had grown around and through what looked like human remains. Faces half consumed, skulls embedded in tree roots, ribcages covered in glowing red veins. Some of the bones still had tattered scraps of clothing clinging to them, pieces that looked like the same gear from the missing hikers' camp. The hum deepened, becoming a steady, rhythmic throb that seemed to come from everywhere. The fungus pulsed in response, glowing faintly. Amelia could barely stand, her vision spinning. "It's feeding on them," she choked out. "The fungus, it's alive." Grant stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. "We have to go," he started, but then froze. One of the red-capped growths beside the nearest tree began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it split open down the middle with a wet, tearing sound. Inside, a pale shape shifted, something soft, twitching, half-formed. The outline of a hand pressed weakly against the inside of the fungal membrane before sinking back into the mass. The sight broke something inside them. Amelia grabbed Grant's arm, her nails digging into his jacket. "Run!" They scrambled up the slope, slipping in the wet soil as the humming rose to a deafening pitch. The ground quivered beneath them as if something enormous was stirring beneath the surface. Roots shifted, snapping like bones. The air was thick with spores now, fine, glittering dust that sparkled in their flashlight beams. Amelia coughed violently, her throat burning. Behind them came a sound that neither could describe, a deep, gurgling moan, like a chorus of trapped voices rising from the earth. The fungal field was moving, swelling, expanding as though responding to their panic. Shapes began to rise from the growths, vague human silhouettes coated in pulsing red fungus, their forms dripping with fluid. Their movements were slow, jerky, unnatural, as if learning how to walk. Grant didn't dare look back again. He could hear them, though, the wet shuffle of their feet, the faint, collective breathing. The forest around them seemed to join in, the trees creaking in harmony with that unearthly hum. When they finally reached the top of the slope, Amelia stumbled and fell to her knees. Grant turned to help her, but stopped cold. Down below, in the ravine, the glowing fungal shapes stood motionless now, their blank faces all turned upward, toward him. Toward her, watching. For a long, frozen moment, no one moved. Then one of the shapes, taller than the rest, lifted its head and let out a low, echoing sound that wasn't quite human. It was almost like a name being whispered through the trees. And Grant realized, with horror creeping through his chest, that it was his name. They pressed deeper into the woods, and the world seemed to shift around them. The trees grew denser, leaning inward like ancient sentinels, their limbs twisting together in grotesque shapes that blotted out most of the light. The fog had turned into something thicker, heavier. It didn't just drift, it clung, like breath against glass. Amelia's flashlight beam struggled to cut through it, and even Grant's usually calm face had hardened into a mask of unease. Every sound, the drip of water, the creak of branches, their own breathing, echoed unnaturally loud. It felt as though the forest itself was amplifying their fear. Then, they reached a ravine. It sliced through the earth like an open wound, its edges soft with moss and fungus. From below came a faint luminescence, a reddish glow pulsing in a steady rhythm. The same color as the tree they'd found earlier. Grant knelt near the edge, trying to see the source. "It's spreading," he muttered. Amelia crouched beside him, peering down. The walls of the ravine were lined with tendrils, thick, root-like growths covered in that same veiny fungus, throbbing faintly, as if alive. They climbed over rocks and trees, twisting upward toward the surface. The smell was stronger here. Sweet, metallic, and foul. Amelia pressed a hand over her nose. "This isn't natural," she whispered. "It's like, the forest is infected." Grant didn't answer. He was staring at one section of the ravine where the fungus seemed to have formed clusters, bulbous sacs the size of human heads. They quivered slightly, oozing a translucent fluid that dripped into the shallow stream below. And inside one of them, he thought he saw movement. A shape. Something shifting just beneath the membrane, like a body curled in fetal position. He stumbled back, his boot slipping on the wet moss. Amelia grabbed his arm before he could fall, pulling him upright. His breathing was ragged now. "There's something down there," he said hoarsely. "Something inside those things." She tried to focus her flashlight again, but the beam flickered and died, leaving only the faint reddish glow from below. Her stomach churned as she realized the rhythmic pulse of the fungus matched the faint vibration they'd been hearing since they entered the forest. It wasn't a sound at all. It was coming from beneath them. Suddenly, a muffled sound echoed from below, like a moan, faint and wet. Amelia froze. It came again, longer this time, distorted but human. "Please, help," the voice seemed to come from the direction of the sacs. She staggered back, shaking her head. No, no, that's not possible. They've been missing for years. But Grant couldn't look away. What if, he trailed off, unable to finish. The voice came again, weaker, then dissolved into a wet gurgle. The forest around them began to stir. The air shifted, leaves rustled though there was no wind. The tendrils below seemed to twitch in response to the sound. One of the sacs ruptured suddenly, releasing a gush of red liquid that splattered across the rocks. The smell was unbearable, iron and rotten something chemical. Amelia screamed and stumbled backward, dragging Grant with her. He tried to steady the camera he was holding, fumbling with trembling hands. The lens caught a brief glimpse of the ruptured pod, and for a second, the camera light reflected off something pale inside, a fragment of what looked like a human face, half dissolved, eyes open but unfocused. They ran. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots tripped their feet, and the forest seemed to close in tighter the farther they went. Behind them, the pulsing light grew brighter, flashing in waves through the fog like the beat of a monstrous heart. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Amelia turned and looked back. The red glow still throbbed faintly in the distance, rising and falling like breathing. She could swear she heard the forest whispering now, soft, low, and almost mournful. She didn't know if it was the wind or the echoes of something else entirely. But deep down, she understood one thing. Whatever had taken the missing hikers 4 years ago hadn't just killed them. It had absorbed them, and the forest was still hungry. They reached the ridge as the last trace of sunlight bled out behind the mountains, leaving the world in a cold, metallic twilight. The fog had lifted slightly here, revealing a canopy that stretched endlessly beneath them, an ocean of treetops swaying gently in the still air. But something was wrong. From above, patches of red glowed faintly among the greenery, scattered like embers in ash. It wasn't fire. It was the fungus, spreading across the forest in thick, web-like veins that glimmered faintly in the darkness. Amelia felt her throat tighten. The infection wasn't confined to the valley anymore, it was growing, consuming, reaching for the surface. Grant set his backpack down and pulled out a drone, hoping to get aerial footage. His fingers trembled as he launched it into the air. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy feed of the forest below. At first, it was just trees, branches, and mist. Then, the red veins became clearer, pulsing in patterns that looked disturbingly deliberate. Amelia leaned closer to the monitor, whispering, "It's forming shapes, like a network." She traced her finger over the display. "It's following the waterline, the roots." Grant zoomed in on a large clearing. His breath caught. In the center was something new, a cluster of trees fused together into a massive, bulbous form, their trunks warped and grown around a central mound. From its surface oozed that same red secretion they'd seen before, pooling into the ground. The shape almost resembled a cocoon, or worse, a womb. "What is that?" Amelia whispered. Before Grant could answer, the drone's camera flickered violently. Static washed over the feed, but for one brief second, something appeared in the distortion. A face, pale and hollow-eyed, pressed against the inside of the growth, mouth open in a silent scream. Then the screen went black. Grant cursed under his breath, frantically trying to regain signal, but the drone feed was dead. He looked at Amelia, her face pale and rigid. "We need to go back," she said. "Now. This is bigger than us." But Grant hesitated, staring at the forest below. "If we leave now, no one will believe what we saw. We need evidence." Amelia's voice broke. "We have enough evidence, Grant. That thing was alive." Before he could reply, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep, low vibration that rolled through the earth. Birds erupted from the trees below, screeching wildly as they scattered into the dusk. The forest seemed to groan, the sound echoing like a massive exhale. The ridge shifted slightly, small rocks tumbling down into the valley. Amelia stumbled, catching herself on a root. The smell hit them next, sweet, rotten, and suffocating. It was coming from the forest below, stronger than ever, filling the air like a wave. Grant raised his flashlight and caught movement in the trees beneath them. Dozens of shadows, swaying unnaturally. For a moment, he thought they were animals, but as the beam steadied, the shapes came into focus. They were humanoid. Figures standing motionless among the infected trees, their skin pale and glistening under the faint red light. Their bodies were partially covered in fungus, tendrils wrapping around their limbs and faces like living vines. One of them turned its head slowly upward, as if sensing the light. Amelia gasped. Its eyes were gone, replaced by milky growths that pulsed faintly in sync with the glowing veins. Grant stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. "They're still here," he whispered hoarsely. "The hikers, they never left." Amelia grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the path. "We're leaving now," she hissed. They ran, branches whipping against their faces, the forest roaring with unseen movement behind them. The ground shook again, and the faint hum that had haunted them since the beginning grew louder, almost deafening now. It wasn't just beneath the ground, it was all around, vibrating through the air, through their bones. As they fled, the red glow spread upward through the trees like veins of fire. The forest seemed alive, awake, aware of them. Amelia dared one last glance back and saw the ridge collapsing slightly, the earth cracking open in lines of crimson light. The figures below were moving now, slowly climbing the slope, arms twitching, their fungal bodies glistening in the red haze. By the time they reached their campsite, both were drenched in sweat, shaking and pale. The sound of the forest had quieted again, too quiet, as if it had swallowed its own voice. Amelia collapsed near the tent, gasping for air. Grant stared back into the woods, where the glow had dimmed once more. "It's spreading," he said softly. "The whole forest, it's becoming something else." Amelia looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Then we have to warn them," she said. "Before it spreads beyond these trees." But deep down, they both knew, it was already too late. Night had fallen completely now, but the darkness in the redwoods didn't feel like ordinary night, it felt alive, thick and watching. The fog had turned to a soupy haze, glowing faintly red from within the forest as if the ground itself was breathing firelight. Amelia and Grant sat by their dim camp lantern, too shaken to speak. The drone, the footage, the movement, they'd both seen it, both knew what it meant. But saying it out loud would make it real, and that was the one thing neither of them wanted to do. Grant fumbled with the camera, trying to review what footage they still had, desperate for proof. The screen blinked, static flaring and fading, but he managed to recover fragments, the glowing veins across the forest floor, the pulsating tree bark, and the faint outline of faces half absorbed by fungus. Each clip was more distorted than the last, but they carried one undeniable truth: something intelligent was growing out there. Something that mimicked life, that fed on it. Amelia stared at the trees, her knees drawn close to her chest. "It's not just an infection," she said quietly. "It's evolution." Her voice trembled. "It's using whatever it consumes to spread." Grant didn't answer, but her words echoed in his mind. He remembered the pulsing pods, the voice calling for help, the human figures with hollow eyes. The fungus wasn't killing, it was transforming. It was merging everything it touched into itself. The forest crackled faintly in the distance, a wet, squelching sound that rose and fell like waves. Then came another sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was steady, deliberate. Both of them froze. Grant killed the lantern instantly, plunging them into near darkness. The sound continued, closer now, like someone, or something, was circling the edge of their campsite. Amelia grabbed his arm. Her whisper was barely audible. "It's right there." They listened. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then, a faint crunch of leaves. Grant aimed the flashlight toward the noise, his hand shaking. The beam cut through the mist and landed on a shape, something standing half hidden behind a tree. For a moment, he thought it was a man. It wore a torn jacket, one sleeve hanging loose. But as the light steadied, the figure turned its head. Its face was covered in a crust of red fungus, its jaw slightly unhinged, and a thick white tendril pulsed along its neck, disappearing into the bark of the tree behind it. Amelia clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The figure twitched, jerking once, twice, like a marionette, and then it started moving toward them. Not walking, dragging, its feet scraping through the mud. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if guided by something unseen. Grant fired up the lantern again, hoping the light would repel it, but the glow only revealed more horrors. Behind the first figure were others emerging from the fog, 3, then 5, then a dozen, moving together in an eerie synchronization, their bodies half fused with fungal growths, their skin glistening with moisture. Grant and Amelia backed away slowly, their breath shallow. The figures didn't make a sound. Their eyes, or what was left of them, seemed fixed on the two intruders. The tapping resumed, louder this time. Amelia realized with horror that the sound wasn't coming from the ground, it was coming from their throats. The creatures were producing the sound by clicking their teeth in rhythm, like a hive communicating through a coded signal. Grant's voice broke. There, connected. The realization hit them both like a weight. The fungus wasn't just spreading through the forest, it was linking everything it touched into one living network, one organism that saw, heard, and acted as a whole. The missing hikers weren't lost, they were part of it now. Suddenly, one of the figures lunged forward, its movements jerky but powerful. Grant shouted and swung the lantern, smashing it against the ground. Flames erupted briefly, licking up the damp leaves. The red light reflected in the creature's wet skin, and for a split second, Amelia saw its face clearly, a woman's face, half covered in mold, her mouth frozen in a silent plea. It was one of the missing hikers. The forest exploded with noise, the humming, the tapping, the shifting of the ground. Amelia grabbed Grant's arm, pulling him toward the trail. They ran blindly, branches slashing their faces, roots grabbing at their ankles. Behind them came the chorus of clicking, dozens of voices merging into one rhythm that pulsed through the earth. The forest glowed brighter with every step, as if the entire ecosystem had awakened. When they finally reached the old trail marker near the edge of the forest, Amelia collapsed to her knees, gasping. Grant turned, looking back at the woods. Through the fog, he could still see faint red lights flickering in the trees, dozens of them, watching. The sound of clicking continued faintly, echoing from deep within. Amelia whispered, trembling, "We're not safe, are we?" Grant shook his head slowly. "No," he said, voice hollow. "It knows we're here now. And somewhere deep in the forest, beneath the roots and soil, something pulsed in answer, slow, steady, alive." The morning came gray and cold, though it brought no sense of safety. The fog still clung to the redwoods, thicker than ever, and the air hummed faintly with that same vibration that Amelia and Grant now recognized, not a natural sound, but a heartbeat, deep within the earth. They hadn't slept. Their bodies trembled with exhaustion, but neither dared close their eyes. Every time they tried, they heard it again, the clicking, faint and deliberate, just beyond the trees. Grant sat by the remnants of their campfire, staring at the memory card from the broken camera. It was the only thing they'd salvage, the only proof that what they'd seen wasn't a nightmare. Amelia packed their gear in silence, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped her flashlight twice. "We need to get out," she said, her voice brittle. "We need to leave now." Grant nodded but didn't move. His eyes were locked on the forest, watching the faint red glow pulse faintly beneath the fog. It was closer than before. "It's moving," he murmured. "It's following the roots. It's spreading faster." They began their hike back toward the trailhead. The path, which had once been familiar, now looked alien. The trees were warped and swollen, their bark streaked with black veins and spore clusters that shimmered in the dim light. The ground was soft and wet, giving underfoot like flesh. With each step, a faint suction sound followed, as though the forest was reluctant to let them go. Halfway down the trail, Amelia stopped abruptly. Something glinted from the soil ahead, a small, metallic object half buried in the mud. She bent to pick it up. It was a badge, rusted and bent, but the engraving was still clear, Ranger Douglas. Her throat tightened. That was one of the rangers who had gone missing during the first search for the hikers 4 years ago. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "It's been feeding for years," she whispered. "It's been waiting for us to come back." Before Grant could respond, the forest shifted again. A low groan echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of movement, wet, dragging steps approaching from behind. They turned. Through the mist, figures began to emerge once more, slow and deliberate. The same eyeless, fungus-encrusted forms, but now there were dozens, maybe hundreds. Their pale faces swayed in unison, veins glowing faintly beneath their skin. Grant grabbed Amelia's hand. "Run!" They tore down the path, their lungs burning. The forest around them seemed alive, shifting, branches closing in. Red sap dripped from the trunks like blood. Every breath tasted metallic, every sound muffled by the thick air. The clicking began again, faster now, like a chorus rising in tempo. It wasn't random anymore, it was a pattern, like a signal being broadcast through the woods. They reached the edge of the forest, the faint outline of their car visible through the fog. Relief hit them in a rush, but it was short-lived. The ground beneath Amelia's feet gave way suddenly, collapsing into a shallow sinkhole. She screamed as she fell, landing hard on something soft and damp. Grant dropped to his knees, reaching for her. His flashlight beam flickered over what she'd fallen into, and froze. She wasn't on dirt. She was on a bed of bodies. Half decayed, half consumed, each one cocooned in red fungus that connected them like roots. Their faces were still visible, men, women, hikers, rangers, all fused into the same grotesque network. The air was thick with spores, shimmering faintly in the light. The ground beneath them pulsed, once, twice, like a heartbeat. Grant pulled her free, both of them gasping and choking. They stumbled the last few feet to the car, slamming the doors behind them. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting through the mist. But as they sped down the dirt road, Amelia looked out the window and froze. The trees along the roadside were glowing faintly, veins of red spreading through their trunks like fire under skin. "Grant," she whispered, "it's everywhere." He pressed harder on the gas, his face pale. The radio crackled suddenly, filling the silence with static, and then, through the noise, a faint voice emerged. It was distorted, broken, but clear enough to chill the air. "Help us." Amelia's eyes widened. The voice wasn't coming from the radio station, it was coming from the camera still in Grant's lap. The same device that had recorded the footage from the forest. He looked down in horror as the screen flickered on by itself. The image showed the forest floor, pulsing red, alive, and then a face pressed against a lens. It was his own. The screen went black. Grant slammed on the brakes. For a moment, neither of them breathed. The forest ahead glowed faintly red, the road behind them swallowed by fog. Then, slowly, the faint sound of clicking began again, coming from somewhere in the backseat. Amelia turned, trembling, flashlight in hand. The beam caught a smear of red across the rear window, fresh and glistening. Her heart stopped. The clicking grew louder, faster, until it filled the entire car. Outside, the forest pulsed once more, and in that moment it was clear, the redwoods weren't a forest anymore. They were a living organism, vast and ancient, feeding on whatever wandered too deep. And now, it had found its way out.